with the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development coming to an end in 2019, now is the time to look to the future. In a series of intensive brainstorming symposia and a review of current ESD work, UNESCO has drafted a position paper on the future of ESD, welcoming public comment through November 19th. The position paper is posted on the UNESCO website. The link is available on the SCC website and in the announcements that we sent directly to you and to various listservs. By reflecting on the value of ESD and the gap, and drilling down into each of the Sustainable Development Goals, participants have identified how education is necessary to achieve all the SDGs. As a driver for the SDGs, education should be front and center, as it is necessary to educate across all sectors and disciplines in a variety of formal, non-formal, and informal educational modalities. In this webinar, Kim Smith, who serves as a higher education envoy for the United Nations University, ASHE, and the U.S. Partnership for ESD, will guide a review of the recommendations and invite feedback. Kim is already known to many of you in the SCC audience as the host of our international webinar series, and she is a member of SCC's Advisory Council. Given the current focus on sustainability competencies, Kim will share more about the competencies that are emerging from this process. With that, I am going to shift the presenter role over to Kim.
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you, Ira. Okay, so I should share my screen. I'll do all of the instructions. Can you see my slide deck?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, hello everyone. We're going to have a nice opportunity today to go over some of the history of education for sustainable development to make sure everybody's on the same page on that. And then we will be talking about several core initiatives that are really guiding us where we are now and moving forward into the future. I'm really excited about the opportunities that UNESCO is providing for so many of us and how we on the ground level are able to implement this work. We also, I saw on the list, we also have Juan Bune from UNESCO, who hopefully will be able to join in during our discussion time if you have questions. I'm going to do my best to provide context to these core issues, but also we'll have time at the end to invite feedback and some next steps. All right. So I was kind and gave my background and give a little bit more information. More than who I am, really, I just want to give some shout outs to the groups who have been really core in helping make this happen in the United States and in my own life. So Portland Community College, where I teach sociology, is just a sustainability leader for our nation and doing all kinds of interesting sustainability efforts. So I'm on their Sustainability Leadership Council and have also helped co-found RCE Greater Portland. You're familiar perhaps with some of the regional centers of expertise on ESD around the world. So we're really proud of the work we've been doing on a regional level. With ASHE, Ira mentioned, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. We just had our conference in October, and the theme was the global goals rising to the challenge. And this presentation is an adaptation of one that I gave there, and Ira was kind enough to invite me to expand it and provide it to all of you. So I want to give a shout out to ASHE for really putting a focus on the SDGs, something we've certainly needed within the United States. So yeah, it's wonderful to be back here with SCC and to also have the advising support from Deborah Rowe with U.S. Partnership for ESD. If you do have questions, feel free to contact me at katie.smith@pcc.edu. All right, so let's dive into the history. On basic levels, right? So again, some of you, this is going to be so review, but please bear with me. So we want to get the context, right, as to how have we come to the present state where UNESCO has created this draft position paper for us to review. 1992, let's start right there. Agenda 21 and Chapter 36. At the Earth Summit, Education for Sustainable Development received a core focus, and they recognized that we need to have quality education, but we also need to redefine the purpose of education. And so I want to emphasize the for, education for sustainable development, as a preposition, that it's not just sustainability education as a discipline, but it's a way of reorganizing education for a sustainable future. So let's keep thinking about our roles in how to help that transition happen on a planet that is finite and within cultures that are diverse. So Chapter 36 focused on education, so you can refer back to that if you'd like to look at the history. That then informed a whole decade. The decade for ESD, which was led by UNESCO, was a really incredible and important time for people to explore, increase public awareness, identify programs and pathways to implement ESD. And one of the things that's most significant is that there were only 2 chapters that received whole decades. I believe it was biodiversity and ESD. So it was a really fortunate opportunity for us to have that focus and opportunity to grow. So going forward, Rio plus 20, so move 20 years forward to 2012 and the future we want. I was fortunate, Ira, I saw you use the picture of me in Rio. I was really honored to get to represent ASHE and be part of the higher education team there, really advocating for the work that we do and the role that higher education can play to advance a sustainable future. So what kind of future do we want? I'm really inspired by these 5 Ps. I know we always use the E's and equity, economics, and environment, but this is really where the new definition of sustainable development is. Note, we have planet and people, some of the social and environmental issues, but the term prosperity really matters. It's not profit now. Notice the P changed. So all kinds of economic models, and that also allows for well-being. So note those changes, as well as peace and partnership. Those are the mechanisms that help us achieve a sustainable future. And you'll see these show up in the SDGs, which I will get to in just a little bit. But recognizing just that I'm doing a calendar, so moving forward from 2012, we hit the end of the decade. The end of the decade for ESD was celebrated in Japan at the UNESCO World Summit on ESD in Aichi, Nagoya, and again, representing ASHE, but also working with UN University. And we had a team from the United States who went. So that was a wonderful opportunity to really recognize what had we achieved. And this is an ongoing process, right? Like, who are we? What are we doing here? What have we been able to, reflect upon in terms of the work we actually do? So this process led to a reaffirmation of the work of ESD and the Global Action Program. So the gap on ESD, this is where we're really moving into the present, because this is what's coming to an end in 2019. And we want to think about where we are now at the end of 2018 and where we want to go. But this roadmap was a set of best practices, and every country was asked to write a gap. I was one of the co-authors for the gap for the United States. That is available if you'd like to see that. Every country was supposed to have one. So if you have not seen the plan that your own country wrote focused on education for sustainable development, I encourage you to please check that out and check in with your State Department or whoever your governing body would be who would work on the education plans. So these are the 5 areas that the GAP that UNESCO and the teams identified as the best practices. Okay, the priority action areas. You're going to see these again at the end, and I want to emphasize that this is not top-down government. It's not, UNESCO telling us what to do. It's just best practices that we can look at that can guide, structure our next steps for implementation. Really thinking about how you would customize that to your own regional or institutional needs and challenges, and then coming up with programs that can celebrate the work perhaps that's already happening, or develop something that can leverage existing resources. So with the policy piece, I really want to emphasize how can we align more with our regional or national policies to help them implement their work around sustainability. What do we need to do within our training environments? What we're doing right now, we're building capacity right now by having a webinar with educators and trainers. There's always an emphasis on youth. So thinking about what we can do for the K-12 sector, the higher ed sector, and then of course moving forward into the local level, at the community level, making sure we have partnerships with our local governments, our local industries, nonprofits or NGOs, and media. So this has been a really valuable tool for us in the Greater Portland region and in our RCE. And it's been fun to also report what we're doing, because maybe folks don't know. You might be doing lots of things, but if we can't tell stories, then we're at an imbalance. Anyway, that's where we have been. I want to get into our current efforts. And I want to point out there's a touch of feedback from somebody, so we want to make sure to mute microphones or if we can. Okay, so moving forward, so that was 2014 and developing the gap, in 2015 when it started. September 2015, all the member states adopted Agenda 2030. This is the plan for how to create a sustainable future by the year 2030. And these global goals are, we recognize that they're very aspirational, but they're also really powerful. Look at how they can, if they're connected, they are relevant, universal across all countries. And so the top, those are your social or people goals. Then you can see the prosperity or economic community goals. The next, from 11 and 12 onward, you go into the environmental or planetary goals. And then we see peace and partnership again. So again, those 5 Ps are guiding principles. So I can make this slide deck available for you if you'd like to use these in presentations to your communities. It's important for us to think about how we are actually doing a lot of this work, and if not, how we can, again, meet with each other, increase our collective impact to achieve some of these goals. Today I'm focusing on goal 4 with quality education and the reality that all of these goals require ESD. We can't achieve these goals without ESD, so understand that's where I'm headed next. So from 2015 moving forward, we want to look at target 4.7. I'll be quiet for a moment, there's a lot of words there. So for those of you who are calling in and can't read this, this is target 4.7. So there are 169 targets within the global goals, within the SDGs, and education for sustainable development is 4.7. Yes, we do look at goal 4 itself in ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education, but our charge, our responsibility for folks who work in the sustainability field around education is 4.7. So by 2030, I always laugh because there's so much pressure. Goodness, we're supposed to acquire, all learners are supposed to acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. And that includes ESD, as we've talked about, sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture and peace and nonviolence. They've added in global citizenship, so that's another hat that we wear now. And this recognition of the value of cultural diversity and how culture can contribute to sustainable development. 4.7 is so big, as some of you surely are reacting to. Understand that it's also buried. It's buried within all of these targets. So our question really is, how can education become the driver for the SDGs? So I recognize, Juan, I want you to recognize that this was not necessarily defining the new draft, but this was the first conference that I had been to that really asked big questions about what role education can play to achieve the SDGs. And this was the first big the big conference besides Paris, besides COP21 and the Paris Agreement, that met around one of the SDGs. So we met in India in January 2016, and there were groups, 750 people, had to drill down into each of the SDGs and identify recommendations for how not just formal education, but non-formal education with workforce training, TVET, and community workshops, as well as informal education with public awareness campaigns, can help us meet the SDGs. I think the Ahmedabad plan is well written. I really like the recommendations. A lot of us spend time recreating the wheel, and I don't know how many times we need to sit down and say, what does sustainability mean to us again, or what should we do? We have to, it's urgent, we have to get the work done. Please turn to these documents that I'm sharing with you today and understand that some of the people, the leaders of the world, the practitioners of the world have been digging into this work in symposia and trainings and technical consulting to help us have plans, help us have pathways to get this work done. So if you go to that website, the CEE ESDG website, you'll see all of the sets of recommendations for each of the SDGs. So how do we move forward from here? That was 2016. I'm really inspired by Irina Bokova and the Director General of UNESCO. She is, as have many of the leaders of UNESCO, called for a fundamental change and education's role in global development, and to really recognize it as a catalytic impact on the well-being of individuals and the future of our planet. Again, I'm reading some of these for those who are on the phone or who might be listening to the recording in the future as a podcast. So now more than ever, education has a responsibility to be in gear with 21st century challenges and aspirations. How can we make that happen? One of the tools is Education 2030. And I love this book that I'm going to share with you. It's a workbook that was created through UNESCO, written by a whole team of, or edited by a whole team of folks, and really has, I'm flipping through it actually just a little bit here to see a few names. This is something you can get as a, I'll show you as a PDF, but Education 2030 itself really identifies that education is both a goal, right? A goal in itself and a means for attaining all the other SDGs. And it's not only an integral part of sustainable development, but also a key enabler for it. So recognizing Kian Tong, the Assistant Director General for Education, in that quote, we have to really elevate our own work, right? See ourselves as the change agents and the leaders to help achieve the SDGs in partnership. So really consider new ways to become an integral part of sustainable development and an enabler. So here's the cover of the book. These are a set of learning objectives. As Ira mentioned, there's a set of competencies that we'll be exploring. And so you could just Google this title, Education for Sustainable Development Goals, Learning Objectives, and that is available on the UNESCO site, along with a couple of really cool videos and some resource links. This, again, is a call, right? It's a call for us to be heroes in this time in history, that all individuals must become sustainability change makers. And thinking about education itself, we need to require the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that empower them to contribute to sustainable development. So those are competencies, those are values and skill sets that we can impart, we hope, to our students, but also our community members, and of course to ourselves as lifelong learners. So I'm going to go through, this is a summary of some of the core ideas within the ESDG book. I recognize that ESDG might not be a very common acronym being used, but it's a useful tool for today. And think about this for yourselves, in your classes, in your core learning outcomes for your universities. What are you doing and how can we achieve systems thinking? These are key questions. These problems are huge. The global goals are huge. but they are all interconnected. Therefore, we need to start developing system thinking skills. Also, anticipatory competencies. How do we imagine the future? What are possible consequences? What are possible risks? It's unfortunate that the Anthropocene is pushing us into a time where it's just not as stable as it used to be. So those are skill sets that we all need to learn, and certainly our youth need to gain. Sadly, this also comes about because of conflicts of interest. So what kinds of norms, values, and actions can we use that support peace and partnership? Skill sets that allow for mediation of different interests or conflicts and values. Strategic competency is exciting for a lot of fields, but I want to recognize it's not just the STEM programs. Thank you, science, technology, engineering and math programs, but let's think about innovation through the social sciences and the humanities as well. We've focused so much on competition. What can we do to advance collaboration? The collective impact work that's coming out of Stanford really inspires me. Network analysis, the opportunity to increase the scale up our change is really a big word that I continue to look to. This is something that at Portland Community College, I'm on the social science team. We're thinking about how do we effectively teach critical thinking? How do we assess critical thinking? Especially when the media doesn't necessarily teach us that skill set. Self-awareness, we're all in this, right? We're all in this together. What kinds of reflection exercises can we do to increase our sense of engagement within this work, and hopefully empowerment as well? And last but not least, problem solving, right? If you look at all of these competencies, they all really add up to not just knowing something, but doing something. From the book, moving forward, they have another set of tools that I think are awesome. And these are, like we did in India, drilling down into each of the SDGs through the lens of education and looking at the targets. What kind of specific learning objectives for the SDGs do they need using cognitive skills, so knowledge and thinking skills, the socio-emotional domain within our ability, again, to collaborate, negotiate, communicate. That's challenging. Heck, I can hardly communicate with my own father, right? How across these topics, how do we communicate with others across political divides or varying cultures and skill sets? Lots of socio-emotional skills. How can we teach those for each of the SDGs? And then behavioral action skills, really learning how to be competent in doing things, in being empowered and engaging in problem solving. So again, the book is a good workbook that could be used in classes or in community groups to think about what are some of the learning objectives you would need to address climate change, to address inequality, poverty, and hunger. There's a lot of ways, and each of those have been provided for you, and then you can dig in deeper and personalize and customize those strategies. Finally, before I get into the draft itself, I want to emphasize that there are some other highlights to recognize what ESD offers to the SDGs and to all of us. These, you will see them in a similar light because they are very similar to the GAP. So the ESDG Learning Objectives book has some aspects to the 5 priority action areas. So again, what can you do? I'm going to demonstrate these with some examples of things we're doing in Portland and beyond. But not just how can education help achieve these, but how can you integrate purposefully, intentionally, align ESD with policies, strategies, and programs in your institutions, in your communities, in your nations. What can we do to make sure that ESD is more present in our curricula and textbooks, in our teacher education trainings? What delivery methods do we need in our classrooms? Not just formal classrooms again, there's other learning settings, so think talking about your non-formal or your community settings, doing this across an institution, not just in one-offs, not just one class, but how can we change our broader practices? Again, I'm going to demonstrate these next, but I just want to make sure you have these as kind of a checklist. And then the teaching methodologies themselves, the pedagogy, what action-oriented transformative pedagogy can we use? Many exist already, but thinking about how we take information, knowledge that can be very daunting, and inspiring folks to engage in their communities, or creating living labs or citizen science that's transformative. So just a few, again, I like to shout out and recognize communities that are doing great work, or organizations. So here are a few that are shifting policies. I mentioned ASHE. KIASC is the US Partnership for ESD. Is trying to think about ways to go across sectors. Climate Action Plan at PCC has really guided our work. So if your institution does not have a strategic plan focused on sustainability, I encourage you to get one done. And then our partnerships around the world, CACI and ACTS, EAUC, GUNI, and ProsperNet, really amazing efforts. I have Port of Portland up there because if you ever do fly into Portland, please do check out the airport. It is just top-notch, platinum rating, and trying so hard with their practices to be more sustainable. So within our curriculum, just a few heads up for some resources for you. Open, the One Planet Education Network, is focusing on business and business programs. The Eco Challenge with Northwest Earth Institute, very applied ways to change behaviors in class. It's an online program that can happen actually throughout the year, but often in October. The book out of Portland State University, Let Knowledge Serve the City, is a great way to show how research, and this is a partnership between Portland State and Portland, the city of Portland, how we can have partnerships that advance regional needs. You've seen perhaps the SELI test. That's an international online test where you can test your knowledge of sustainability literacy. It's easy to include into classes and work life. So if you're not using that, please do start using that. We have done a lot of sustainability courses, and whether this is, I say we, being PCC, applied learning opportunities in the field, as well as graphic design classes, advertising classes, computer science classes. So these are ways in which we're doing it. I'm just trying to seed the ideas of what is possible. We're doing this again right now, ESD and teacher education. So that could be just, training the teachers themselves, but all across the board, who are sustainability professionals, what types of sustainability curriculum trainings you need. Let IRA know. Let IRA know through the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. Check out Resource Clearinghouses. ASHE has a really big one now, the Sustainability Hub. And moving forward, just recognizing the whole institution approach. If you can see that, hopefully, within ESD, notice that it's a partnership with the schools, facilities and operation, but also governance, community partnerships, and the curriculum, teaching and learning relationships. So not just, like Ira was saying, let's not just change facilities, let's make sure that these are actually in our governance practices and in our relationships in our communities. This, of course, is on the operations level. What kind of construction do you need? Energy consumption, purchasing practices, all the way down to hiring practices and accreditation. So thinking about what it looks like on your campuses to really practice what you preach, walk your talk. And then in terms of pedagogy, this is really an exciting time to do applied learning, to do field research, getting students out into the community, touching walls, like my students are there painting a school, touching clay, building alternative buildings. That's a beautiful pizza oven with a coyote on top. That's at my campus, PCC Sylvania. So if you ever come to Portland, ask for a tour. I'm happy to show you around our campuses and the learning gardens and living labs that we have. We also have a lot of train the trainer workshops that are available as open source. So I'm happy to also share some of those, as well as, of course, many of you surely have materials too. So let's be cross-pollinating our efforts with these types of tools. Okay, what is next? Post-gap, we know it's coming. Those are things that we can continue to do, everything I've just shared, but we want to recognize what's going to happen from 2020 to 2030. We have a decade to solve everything. We can do our best, and again, it's a good pathway. It's a vision for a better future. So calling again for ESD to step up, for ESD to be recognized as a core tool, an integral part of the change process in transformative education. I want to really recognize all of the efforts, the symposia, the consultations, the different kinds of meetings, consultation process that happened to review the gap and to meet together to develop this draft. And this was the last one, 116 UNESCO member states and associate members helping define in the technical consultation meeting. And this was in Thailand, in Bangkok, in July. And so the final draft that you're going to see, that you have access to, emerged from all of these great people negotiating, right? Sharing their expertise, thinking about what key contexts are necessary, what key competencies are necessary. And in their reflections, quick set of statistics here, there's a lot of numbers, so bear with me, but I think this is amazing, that halfway through the gap, they discovered that while, let's see, the partners of the gap supported over 430 strategic policy developments, while there were more than 700 programs developed and implemented to support countries' policy development on ESD. Around 73,000 schools, 2,560,000 learners were supported by the partners, along with 1.5 million educators and 15,000 teacher training institutions. The partners also supported over 1.7 million youth leaders, trained around 62,000 youth leaders as trainers, and finally, over 1,000 civil society organizations conducted ESD activities, and over 700 local ESD activities were established. Those numbers are huge, they're inspiring, they give me hope. I also know that they're incomplete. There are so many more people doing this work, and perhaps you're not counted in these numbers. How can we tell our story? How can you get involved? It's really important that your voice be heard, but also your stories be told. Especially in the United States, how can we collect our data that can get shared with UNESCO and the UN? So recognizing these folks, they have this draft paper. I am just going to pull out a few core reflections. It's kind of dense and it has some of the history I gave you today, but you can go in, read through it, see what you think. And again, I'll give you the link at the end of where you can go to provide your own comments. These are the core reflections that the authors of the draft have provided. First, if we're going to talk about transformative action, that can be disruptive. That can be really challenging the status quo. But if we're going to have a sustainable future, the status quo isn't working. So what can we do to make it through the tougher times of disruption with courage to transform education? How can we work as a community? I love this quote. I don't know if you're using this yet, but this was a huge takeaway for me from this draft. ESD in action is citizenship in action. This is our global citizenship piece, as well as just our own local community sense of identity and work. So that's a key reflection coming out of it. Then moving forward, we have the structural changes. When we talk about change, it's not going to be enough just to learn about the history of something. We have to look at the deep structural causes of the problems and recognizing the technical future. We know the times are changing fast. It's hard to catch up. I'm a sociologist. I'm prepping constantly, right? Classes are always changing. You surely are too, with technology changing. So we just need to be nimble and innovative and prepare for these shifts and tipping points. So the implementation framework. Again, the technical consultants have worked together to come up with this draft. This is a proposed title. We'll see if you like it. So they are planning to build on the gap itself, but adding in 2030 and focusing the gap, focusing ESD on the SDGs, all right? So long title, but the shorthand would be GAP 2030. And the goal for the Global Action Program 2030 on ESD toward achieving the goals, the SDGs, the goal, very beautiful. I hope we have a future like this, to build a more just and sustainable world through the achievement of the 17 SDGs. A just and sustainable world sounds pretty beautiful to me. To get there, they are still recognizing that the 5 priority action areas are valid and key. So you're going to see those show up again. They are asking to expand the network of partners. And so the partners can include all different sectors, but still also, focusing on the role that, teacher education plays, but exploring representatives of governments, local authorities, private sector, civil society organizations, the foundations and donor communities. So be purposeful in recognizing who we are not working with, who we need to be working with. They have had a lot of success with the UNESCO Japan Prize for ESD, and big thanks to Japan for being so supportive of this work over the years. Many of us need motivation, right? Prizes are a good way to recognize good work. So again, the priority action areas, just get them in your head. You will be seeing them again. The draft does a nice job of identifying each of these and how that can be, how they can be achieved through ESD. So that's a nice, that's written really nicely in of ways that ESD applies to these 5 areas. And I want to just recognize UNESCO is offering these types of tools. It's not like they're saying, hey, let's provide a whole bunch of money. We all need, as member states, to think about how we can support these activities. But coming forward with policy advancement, continuing to support networking, building some of those networking tools. Action research. This work we need to document, right? We need good data on the trends. So many of us could be involved in that. What can we do around communication and advocacy? Get this information out to our communities. We're filming this, we're recording this presentation right now, so it could be something that is general enough to share across sectors, across societies. I hope that it's something that's worthwhile for you, so we can expand our partnerships. And finally, let's find out what kind of work we're doing. What kind of good work are we doing on this planet? It's kind of big, but we're being asked to put on our hero capes, right? You got to be a superhero now. And if we're going to change the world, we've got to do it together. So monitoring and evaluation might not sound very sexy, but it is important, because if we are measuring it, then it means it matters. So UNESCO has kindly provided the position draft, made it public for us. The invitation is to review the draft, to share it with your communities, provide 3 comments, and through November 19th. I know it was frustrating for folks that there were some technical difficulties, but it's open now. It's open from November 5th through the 19th. So please do check it out and share your thoughts and your feedback. So that is the overview of these core resources and some history for you. I'm going to turn the slides over to, well, I can leave the slide up, but let's get the microphone back over to Ira and see if there are some questions or ideas. And of course,
beautiful presentation, Kim. You are my superhero.
Thank you.
There has been some useful information posted in the chat box. For those of you who have access to the chat box, I will try to capture some of those sites and post it on the SCC website as well. But Mark McCaffrey has posted a few links. The link to the UNESCO brief is already posted on the SCC website. We've had some comments come in, and let me just read for those who can't see it and for the recording a comment that Mark McCaffrey made. But to me, the issue of scale, reaching even a few million people, is not nearly enough when there's 2 billion youth-age learners on the planet. Let's map out the communities where they live, and say communities of 100,000 people each with maybe an average of 20 to 30% youth learners. And how do we then reach them with global goals like SDGs, but customized / localized for community needs / perspectives? So I throw that to you, Kim, for a reaction.
Mark, you always are so wise and ask good questions. These are the challenges of our time, right? We understand that the youth are our future, and many do not have the means to achieve their goals. So that's part of the disruptive transformative change, right? Like, what do we need to help them not just have educational skills, but employment opportunities, ways to engage intentionally, purposefully, meaningfully. And so I'm really inspired by the ESD youth teams, and youth that come to the events really have a lot of their own documents that they've created. And so those should be made more available for the broader community. Next.
The next comment I'll offer up to you, Kim, is from Dan Scleroux at George Mason University. Action research, very important, but also training to use it ethically and impactfully in ESD and SDG contexts. Any reaction to that one?
That is a perfect comment. That would be one of the examples of things that we should have written into the draft. So absolutely. Hey, I'm a sociologist. American Sociological Association has a very strong code of ethics. What kind of research do we do? How do we do that research? So yes, when you go into the draft, add that into the comments.
I'll do right away. Thanks a lot, Kim.
Sure.
And I'm looking for other questions or comments to come in before we close, but I'll simply say that some of the other names that have been mentioned in the comments, for example, Julian Canary has suggested looking at the work of Dr. Harold Glasser, and we at SCC totally agree. In fact, among the 40 plus webinars that you can access through our website is a very recent one that was led by Harold Glasser.
This is a really key thing. There's so many experts. If we could just, how do we collect all the names of the people who are doing this work? Ira, I'm not sure.
And the answer is that that's why we created SCC. SCC is the community of practice for those who teach sustainability topics in higher education. It's a platform for all comers who have something to offer in the way of experience, insight, or tools to share with the community of practice. So for any of you within the sound of my voice, I try to do a good job of finding you, but you can also find me and suggest running a webinar or one of our online cohorts, or to present at our next faculty conference. So that is, in fact, what we're attempting to do, Kim.
Yeah, I'm going to actually copy the website right now so we can get it over here into the PowerPoint. This is something that for lots of folks, I'm just curious if you have sorry that I'm making changes while we're going here, but want to make sure this is here. If folks are able to share these resources, do you have a So just let's make sure that we have the database available for folks to be able to click through, not just the webinars, but if there's additional resources. Juan, is Juan still on the call with UNESCO? I'd love to hear if she has a thought or two on the... Hello?
Hello. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Juan. Thanks for joining us.
Hello from Paris, everyone. So Kim, is there anything that I could share with you that may help?
Well, of course, if you have any corrections or edits to what I shared, as well as any guiding principles you'd like us to know about, like what are some, do you have any insights that you'd like this community to have?
Well, to begin with, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I think you really made it very lively and exciting. So thank you so much for that. And as you said correctly, that Target 4.7 and all of our works on education for sustainable development is a very ambitious work. And this document that Kim has just introduced, the position paper on the future of ESD, is a living document. So I would like to again emphasize to everybody that we are really open for your suggestions and comments. This current document, which goes around 12 or 13 pages, just outlines the overall policy approach for the future of ESD between 2020 and 2030, but it will be accompanied by another set of document, which is similar to what we had for GAP, a roadmap, which covers mostly the implementation aspects of the post-GAP. So this position paper is more on the overall direction, and there will be another document prepared early next year, throughout next year, and that will also be open for some consultation in the process. That, of course, we also would like to hear that if you have any comments. For example, I see that there are some comments related to directly for implementation. We would still like to receive them during this consultation, or you can just directly email to us at future.esd@unesco.org if you have longer resources or comments that you want to share. So we are very happy to receive your comments. Thank you.
While we have you, Juan, this is Ira again. A couple of items that have popped up in the chat box that I'll just read for those who don't have access to the chat box. Julian Canary says, one thought or question is that UNESCO has a strong initiative around cultural literacy that feels quite allied and powerful. Do you or others with UNESCO see collaboration potential there in the future? And Michelle Merrill specifically asks, how do we get more directly involved with the UNESCO SDG 4.7 efforts, perhaps beyond commenting on the draft?
Thank you. Thank you for those very important comments. First of all, for Julian's comment, I think that's a very important point. And as Kim had explained, Target 4.7, if you read through the last part of it, includes the phrase on appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So as far as SDG targets are concerned, this is the only place where culture is actually mentioned. So we feel that it is part of our mandate to work on this cultural aspects of sustainability more focused around this 4.7 efforts. And what we are doing now, we are closely working with our colleagues in the culture sector to see how we can integrate our efforts and combine and synergize amongst the existing frameworks and efforts that are done in two different sectors. So that is something that we are working on at the moment, and there will be more coming in. But for example, recently we are working together with colleagues in the intangible cultural heritage section to see how we can add the results of their convention reports into the monitoring of 4.7. So that's one of the examples. And that directly leads to Michelle's comment about how to get it directly involved. Well, if it depends from what angle you would like to get involved, but if you are, for example, a researcher with some good ideas, or if you have some comments of how to measure or implement activities related to 4.7, again, feel free to mention that through this consultation we're doing. And of course, there are occasions, events that we are hosting, including there are some upcoming events, including next year's UNESCO Forum on Education for Sustainable Development and Global Citizenship, which will be held in July in Vietnam. So those kind of events are coming up, and we will be sharing those information along the way. So hope you'll be able to collaborate and contribute to the entire process. Thank you.
Thanks again,
Thank you, Juan. I have a couple thoughts real fast. And I just read through the comments as well. And
yeah, I wanted to point you to Daniel Fisher's comment as a wrap-up question.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead. Do you want to say it?
Sure. Daniel Fisher, who is now at ASU, Arizona State, asks a more self-reflective question. One of the key challenges in sustainability education for the past 25 years has been to bring together different communities of educators, environmental education, global learning, etc., to join forces and share their unique perspectives for the common good of advancing sustainability. Being new to the U.S., I'm wondering how far this remains a challenge also for GAP 2030, and what promising ways look like to advance on this front.
Yeah. So this is something, let me go back to this slide for a moment here. The work around, and there were also a nice list of resources, like how do we use the Journal of Sustainability record and different kinds of documents that can help advance communities, either in publications, but also in relationship with each other. And certainly in Arizona, there are some wonderful sustainability programs happening. Thankfully, you have some great funding there as well. But I'm really encouraging folks to look into the RCE model, the Regional Centers of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development. And RCEs have been acknowledged by United Nations University for their multi-sector collaboration across higher education, K-12, and in partnership with communities. And so gypsum.org, if you go there, that has links within that around what is an RCE, how to apply to become one. And we have been fortunate to be able to work directly with United Nations University and UNESCO in the greater Portland region. So I serve as a mentor for that regional development, and happily can share a video and some handbooks on how to become an RCE. We certainly need, I know we have international audience here, but I want to just put a emphasis on the United States really needs to step up. And how can we do that on a regional level and have folks who are new to communities or already engaged meet each other, not feel alone in this process, and again, increase our collective impact, because we really need to, as several people wrote in the list, the comments, this is absolutely urgent. We are in the middle of, the big transformation time in human history and planetary history. So we need to be working together, building the frameworks, building the processes to support each other, sustain ourselves personally in relationship with good people, but also to be able to develop pathways for engagement, whether as researchers or as educators, community activists, whatever that means for you. So it's a really important self-reflective question. How can we get involved? Part of UNESCO's role, part of each community's role, each institution, is to build the systems that facilitate engagement and empower people to help know they can make a difference.
Thanks so much, Kim, for that, and thanks for a truly wonderful webinar. I have also posted in the chat box, a number of people have asked whether the slides will be available. As always, the video recording, which captures all the slides, will be posted on the SEC website, and I promised that I would seek to obtain the PowerPoint deck from you as well, Kim. So
yeah, I'm happy to provide that, and I've made a few edits as you just saw. So I'll send that to you, Ira, and people can, utilize the slides as needed in your own communities.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Kim, and we're going to sign off for the day. I hope people do take a look at the UNESCO draft and provide comments to help out Juan and her colleagues. With that, goodbye for today.
Bye, Ira. Thanks, everyone.